Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. We're not afternoon, it's the evening time. Good evening, everyone. I'm the Reverend Charisma Jean-Marie, and I serve as the Director for Racial Justice Ministries at Scarlett Bennett Center. And I am excited about our another edition of Black Women Who Are Writing series. Black Women Who Are Writing series. And I'm excited to have Reverend Donna Owusu-Ansah with us tonight, who is the author of Love Regardless, a womanist devotional book that I'm absolutely in love with. I was so excited about tonight because I'm so looking forward to diving deep in her life and her work. And we talk about this book. One of the reasons why we have this series, Black Women Who Are Writing, is because there are so many Black women who are writing as it relates to racial trauma. And it's a resource that I believe it's important for us to provide for our community, for those who are looking for ways to expand their understanding of the impact of racism. And for those who, specifically Black women and Black men, Black families, Black people who are looking for resources, who are looking for tools, who are looking for ways to manage racial trauma. The work we do at Scarlett Bennett Center's understanding as co-conspirators that white people are responsible to dismantle white supremacy. And it is the work of Black people to heal from racial trauma. And that healing has a generational impact. And so we don't heal just for ourselves, but we heal for our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and beyond. So that work of healing from racial trauma is crucial. It's crucial to the ways in which we show up and what we pass down in our bloodline, but it's also crucial to dismantling white supremacy. And so I am excited about tonight's conversation with our author for so many reasons, because I believe she's called to the work of healing. And what we need in this moment, particularly the Black community, are voices who are called to healing. So I am so excited to introduce to some and welcome to others, the Reverend Donna Owusu-Ansah. Welcome, Reverend Donna. How are you this evening?
Thank you so much, Reverend Charisma. I am well, and I'm delighted to be here with you tonight. Thank you so much to you for your work, and more than your work, for who you are. And thank you to Scarlett Bennett Center, which I hold dear in my heart. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm excited.
Yes. So we're going to get started. But as always, to our community who's watching, you are always welcome to join in the conversation right there on the live stream post. You're welcome to write any questions or comments that you have. We love to engage you this evening. But as always, differences of opinion are always welcome, but difference does not mean disrespect or hate. So any comments that reflect that, we will delete immediately. So as we get started, Reverend Donna, I want to get started with getting to know you, who you are. And so let's start with you telling us your Genesis story. Tell us about your Genesis journey, your story.
Yes, my Genesis story, right? In the beginning, I'm thinking about which beginning to start at, but I'll start with, I am the daughter of Lois and John Powell. My parents are very much still alive, and I am blessed for that. And so shout out to them. I know my mom is listening, so let me just go ahead and say that. I am the daughter of John and Lois Powell. I am the sister of Elizabeth Spencer and the aunt of Kendrick Owens, who is more like a sister to me than a niece. I was born and raised in Mount Vernon, New York, which is a suburb of New York City. People think it's upstate New York. People think it's very far. It's actually, you can cross the street and you're in the Bronx. I call us stepchildren of the Bronx. And so I'm from Mount Vernon, New York, which is 4 square miles, very urban environment. Best known for Heavy D, Dick Clark, Art Carney, Denzel Washington, all out of Felicia Rashad and Debbie Allen, also out of Mount Vernon, New York. And so I'm from a very small community. went to elementary school and middle school in Mount Vernon, New York. Was my words, I was a nerd growing up. It's called a scholar now, right? But I love learning. I love learning. Was a fairly smart girl. My parents encouraged me. I was a voracious reader and writer even as a young girl. When I was in 8th grade at public middle school, I was invited to be part of a summer camp at the Rye Country Day School in Rye, New York, which is about 19 miles away. It's an independent school. And I wanted to go there. Actually, I wanted to go there in 6th grade when another friend was going. And my parents said, girl, we can't afford that. You're not going to Rye. My mom worked up near there. She's a surgical tech. And so there were doctors that she worked with whose children went there. So she knew the tuition. Girl, you're not going there. And so in any case, I went to a summer camp there for gifted and talented students of color. And at that summer camp, I was essentially recruited to the school. And so I ended up there 9th grade to 12th grade. And so I say all of this because it shapes who I am as a Black woman. At 14 years old, I became very much aware of a double consciousness, even though I could not name it at the time, right? I was from this, I had been in Black classrooms all of my life, predominantly Black classrooms all of my life until 9th grade. Mostly, my teachers were very diverse, but mostly white teachers, but very diverse. And then I go to 9th grade and I go there, very shy, but smart and connected with friends. And I go to this predominantly white private school, very affluent, and I was a fish out of water. And it was a tough experience. It was a tough experience, but my saving grace in high school were the other Black students at the school. So my graduating class, we were 70 and there were 4 Black students. Reverend Dr. Courtney Bryant, who was my best friend since 1990 when I got to Rye Country Day School, my prom date, and the dude who lived around the block from me. Like we knew each other well. And so I became very aware of myself as a Black girl then. At a very young age, and kind of navigating what it means to be a Black girl in a white world. So that was high school, graduated from high school. I made it out. Sometimes I look back and I'm like, only the grace of God did I make it out. One of the things that was beautiful is at the time, I didn't grow up churched. My parents were not churchgoers growing up. But when I got to Rye, Courtney and her family belonged to the Bethesda Baptist Church in Rochelle, New York. And she invited me to church and to go to youth group. And so I became very active then in the church until I graduated from high school. And I actually vividly remember our pastor, Dr. Weaver, we were in 10th grade, took us as a youth group on had to be Tuesday night. I think movies came out on Tuesdays then, maybe. A Tuesday night to see Malcolm X. Took our youth group to see Malcolm X. And we got back to school fired up. We were fired up. I think all of the Black kids had gone to see Malcolm X the same night. We came back to school ready to burn the place down. But in any case, made it out of there. And there were some good things that happened there. It wasn't all bad, but it was very difficult, very difficult. I went to New York University undergrad. I started out as a journalism major because I love to write. And my first year of journalism courses, I found the courses to be so boring, right? Because you have to get through all the theory, and that was just boring to me. Around the same time, I was exploring, I had been dabbling in studio art when I was in high school. And so, I realized that I was more creative. I needed to kind of feed and nourish my creative side. And so I came home one day and I told my parents, I'm going to be an artist. And they said, no, you're not. And so I changed my major from journalism to studio art with a minor in education. because I couldn't be an artist, but I could be an art teacher, right? Because for my parents, I needed to be doing something stable, something where I was going to, be able to support myself and family. So matriculated through NYU as one of 2 Black students in the studio art program. And so there I was again. And there at New York University, I was making art that my peers had no language to discuss, and my professors weren't interested in discussing. And so, with the exception of one, Lyle Ashton Harris, who came in my senior year, I remember his presence very vividly. And so it was also very isolating. So I went from this predominantly white private school where I felt very much alone, with the exception of being with the Black students. And then I went to the studio art program where I felt very misunderstood, right? And looking back, I was making work that was womanist. And I just didn't have the language to describe it, right? And I took 1 year off, and then I went to Howard University for their Master of Fine Arts program. And I got to the campus of Howard in the Fine Arts building, and I came alive. I was introduced to artists that I had never seen or known their work before. I was introduced, my concentration was in photography at NYU. I was introduced to Black women photographers who were doing this amazing work. Lorna Simpson and Carrie Mae Weems. I mean, I was like a kid in a candy store. And at Howard, I had wonderful mentors in the art department. I had wonderful friends who I'm still, my girls, they're more than friends, they're sisters. And so I flourished at Howard. Left there, came back home, and went back to, it's a long story, but I went back to teach at the summer camp that I had been a student at. Went back to teach. And then I was offered a position to teach at the school. So I went back to the school, the site of trauma, to teach middle and high school photography and art history, a very different experience than when I was a student, because I was an adult now. I had language to describe. I could make my needs known. I knew how I had community, and I also knew how to form community. I felt very privileged and blessed to be there because there were Black students for whom I had them in the classroom, but they were Black students who I also, had relationships with. And so I was a mentor to Black students who were experiencing very same issues that I had experienced 20 years before, and able to be there and kind of walk them through and talk them through and say some stuff they couldn't say, right? So that's my Genesis. I think that was Genesis through Exodus. I think we may have gotten all the way up to Esther.
What I was thinking about when you were telling the story is there was a comment that was made a few years ago from someone who said, I think this was an author who said, in a world, if you are looking for something that's wrong with you, you'll find it. You'll find it. It's easy to find it. So talk to us a little bit about, particularly in a world where you were placed in white spaces oftentimes as a Black woman, and you know what white spaces say and do to Black women. How did you find, right, an understanding of not just your humanity, but the beauty in being, right? Gift of being a Black woman in white spaces. Like, tell that Genesis story.
That came after, right? That certainly came after. And I would say that probably began to happen when I was at Howard, where I was affirmed as a Black woman in a Black space, where my voice was affirmed as a Black woman in this space, where my art, oh my goodness, where my art was affirmed. And so when I left Howard, I didn't need to be affirmed in white spaces because I was already standing. Like literally, it was almost as if I had been knocked down, and at Howard, mentors, professors, my peers, my friends lifted me back up so that I could walk then into these white spaces and not need to be affirmed and stand in my full humanity unapologetically as a Black woman. I remember I have a former student from the school very recently during COVID, and with all the racial unrest, there have been these accounts on social media. I don't know if you've seen them, but they're Black at, and then predominantly white school, right? There are a whole slew of them. And so there's a Black at RCDS one. And there are days I would go in and read the comments and say, oh Lord, I can't believe this is still happening. But I can, right? I can. But one day I was looking and I saw a comment where one of the students, and I did not remember this until I read her comment. One of the students, she was a student at the time, she's now an adult, family, PhD, teaching ethnomusicology in Chicago. But she wrote, there was some wellness seminar on eating disorders. And the woman who was leading the seminar got up there and talked about how Black women have no body issues, and how eating disorders are not prevalent in the Black community, and so on and so forth. And here were Black girl students who were struggling with their own bodies in this white space, but also silence, couldn't say anything. But I was an adult in the room, I was the teacher, and I spoke up and said, that's not true. And here are the facts, right? And I could present the facts because most of my work at Howard, the visual work I was doing was around Black women in body image, particularly the video vixen image. And so I could speak, right, from a place of authority. On this Black at RCDS page, now 15 years later, here's a student recalling how my presence and voice gave them voice, right? And so when I went back there, I didn't go back there as the girl Donna who had been there as a teenager. I went back there as a fully grown woman, right? So that you know, affirming my humanity and accepting and standing apologetically in my humanity as a Black woman in white spaces happened after Howard. I think Howard was, I love Howard. Howard was the place that really nurtured and nourished me. I don't own an NYU t-shirt or sweatshirt. I don't own an RCDS t-shirt or sweatshirt. I do give money for action because I believe in the camp. But I wear my Howard sweatshirt proudly, proudly.
Yeah, I can hear that and understand why. I think part of one of the reasons I asked you about that, because when we think of racial trauma, one of the traumas is the ways in which we're denied our experiences, right? One of the ways trauma is inflicted on us is when we're in spaces and white people are telling us what's our experience or what's not our experience. And we saw that yesterday during the VP debate when Michael Pence on a national television denied, right, that America is racist, denied white supremacy as an ideology that that's really in the DNA of our society, our country, denied implicit bias in systems like policing in our country. And there were a lot of Black people who were triggered by that, who were triggered by that comment. And so I think sometimes it's helpful to hear stories of where we found our Genesis stories, where we're affirming our own humanity, absence of the norms of society, absence of the main, right, voices or majority voices of society. So thank you for sharing that. You started writing recently. So you talked about being an artist, but talk to us about what led you to become an author. What influenced, what led you to begin to write?
Right. So I've always been a writer for as long as I can remember. What's interesting is I was an artist. I think I wrote about this in my book. My sister remembers it differently, but she was 15 years old at the time, so she wouldn't remember it in the same way because it didn't impact her the same way. I used to have a book series, the Value of book series, and I drew a stick figure in the back of The Value of Honesty. It was a story of Abraham Lincoln. I remember it clearly. I drew a stick figure, and I was 5, and my 15-year-old sister, I remember this, told me I couldn't draw. And so I carried that. And so my artist, I pushed her down. I suppressed my artist, right? I pushed her down. But when you're a creative, you can't suppress your creativity, else you will die, right? And not necessarily physical death, although I think that illness can be born, right, of that, but certainly spiritual and emotional death. And so in suppressing my artist, there were other creative modalities that rose up in me. Writing was one of them. And so I used to write poems in middle school and high school. In fact, as part of my mother still has it under her mattress because that's where Black women put everything that's important under the mattress. My mother still has the poem that I wrote.
Don't tell me secret.
Oh, sorry, my bad. It's in the lockbox at the bank. No. But my mother still has the poem, the original poem that I wrote that I actually used as part of my application for New York University. So I wrote a poem as part of my application process. So I've been writing. I remember in college, I used to write poems to guys because, you know, that's what I did. I would write poetry. I'd either have to be like Mary J. Blige, like really happy or really sad, right? Any one of those, you're getting a poem. So in any case, I've been writing for as long as I can remember. And I'll write anything. So when I was at Howard and doing this visual work, I also produced a written thesis, more than what I was asked to produce, because I love writing. And I didn't say this part of my story, but I did go to, and it's important, and I love my experience in seminary. When I went to seminary at the Theological School at Drew University, I loved writing. And so I've always been a writer. And I've recently known, I would say in the past 15 years, that I wanted to write books, right? But life would always get in the way, somehow, right? Either life would get in the way, or if I'm honest, I would get in my own way, right? Self-sabotage, that happens. But the book that we're going to talk about, the devotional book, the idea, talk about the genesis, the idea for it was really conceived in January of 2009. And I had been writing, you know, I had an outline, and then life got in the way, seminary got in the way. And then I started working on it. So I was going to work on it right after graduation, when I was working part-time as an assistant to the pastor at a church. And married life got in the way, and then I was going to work on it, and then children got in the way. And so so I've been working on this book, had been working on it in some way, shape, or form for 11 years. But it was only at the end of March that I really sat down. God spoke to me in so many ways, and also through different people, and in what was going on in our country, to show me that this book needed to be written now. And then God gave me the strength and the stamina and the words. And if I had written this book 11 years ago, it would not be what it is, right? So I had to live these 11 years to be able to produce this work.
So let's get into it. I am in love with your book. It's a devotional book, but it's a different kind of devotional book, I would argue. And I think one of the reasons why I think it's unique from other devotional projects is it's a womanist devotional book. So for our viewers, tell us a little bit about womanism. Some people who might never have even heard of that terminology, because in many ways it's still an academic term, even though it's very much practical in the Black woman's experience. So talk a little bit about womanism and your journey to womanism, and how that has influenced you writing this Love Regardless book.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm thinking about how to approach this question. So I think I said before that when I was at NYU, I was making art that I now know was womanist, but didn't have the language to discuss it, right? I have always been, my life has been informed, deeply informed by Black women. From my mother, my grandmother, my mother, my aunties, women in the building growing up, women at the church, my friends, my sister friends. I have always, as Brittany Cooper writes about in Eloquent Rage, I have always found safety in the company of Black women, right? I have never been the girl who says, I only have male friends. That's not my testimony. Like I've always, been strengthened and bolstered by Black women. And so I've had all these experiences. I get to Drew Theological Seminary, and I take a course called Ministry and Imagination with Reverend Dr. Nancy Lynn Westfield, a womanist scholar, yes, who wrote Dear Sisters. And in taking this course, number one, she saw me. She saw me in a way that no one had ever seen me before, and nurtured gifts within me. That was one. And so that's one. But also the work that she was doing, she introduced me to womanist theology, right? And so for those who don't know, womanist theology finds its definition in Alice Walker's definition of womanism from her book In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, right? I'm going to read just part of it, if I can, the part that influenced the book, right? That a womanist, although I wish I could read the whole thing, I don't have the whole thing in front of me, but a womanist loves music, loves dance, loves the moon, loves the spirit, loves love and food and roundness, loves struggle, loves the folk, loves herself regardless. Womanist theology is really rooted in Black women's voices as primary sources, right? Black women's voices as primary sources. And even in scholarship, womanist thought and theology, because it's theology, and it's certainly not solely Christian, right? But so it's theology, but it's also womanist thought across other disciplines, understands that it's all Black women's voices, right? And so there is the ways in which we know things, right, and learn things are not just from women in the academy, right? But it's from the beautician who's been doing hair for 20 years and has some wisdom, right? Right? There are many ways of knowing. And so, but primarily womanist theology and thought finds its source in Black women's voice and experience.
And gives it authority.
Exactly.
Right.
Karl Barth did nothing for me in seminary. I know there's some folks that love Dolores Williams, Katie Geneva Cannon, Jacqueline Grant, come on, right? Emily Towns, I'm calling these people's names without their Reverend Dr, like I know them, but and then, second, Monica Coleman, who I don't know personally, but I remember she came to Drew once and loved hearing womanist process theology. Raquel Letzum, then St. Clair, who does womanist biblical hermeneutics. So, those were the voices that gave me life in seminary, right?
Yeah, and I think womanism, what womanism does is it amplifies, celebrates the lived experiences of Black women and makes it a priority, right? Says we start with the Black woman's experience.
Yes, and
while
centers
it. And while womanism is communal, right? In womanism, no one is left behind, but we start with the Black woman's experience.
Start with the Black woman. And one of the things I love about the definition also of womanism is that we are not separatists, right? Communal, except for reasons of survival.
That's right. That's right.
Because our survival and thriving and flourishing is also important, right?
It's important and it's connected to the survival and thriving of the community.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Right. Yeah. Womanism say when you elevate the Black woman, the whole community is
community.
Right. Yeah. The whole community is elevated. And so when Big Mama is okay.
Okay. Everybody's okay. That's right. That's right. That's right. And even though I have all these degrees, I understand that my grandmother Beulah Powell may say something and have some experiences that are as valid as, I'm not going to call any names, but as valid as any scholar in the academy.
And sometimes more valid.
I was trying not to say more valid, but
I mean, we're going to tell the truth tonight. We're going to tell the truth.
Tell the truth, right? Exactly.
More valid because their wisdom is rooted in a kind of lived experience, right? That speaks truth to power.
Right, exactly.
It's not theory.
Not theory, but praxis. And Grandma Beulah's voice would likely be laughed at by so many, but womanists recognize that Grandma Beulah, my grandmother Beulah, God bless her, not rest her soul, God bless her. She is 99 years old. In February, she will be 100 years old. She lives in North Carolina. But womanists understand that when Grandma Beulah speaks, I need to stop and listen.
That's right. Oh, yes. What I love about womanism as well is womanism allows for us to reinterpret and reimagine, right? God and the idea of God, God's image, right? God allow for us to reinterpret scripture, allows for us to reinterpret ideas about, right, who we are in the world, right? Gives us language, right? And so, and it also, womanism allows for us to find God in different places, right? Beyond the traditional spaces, like the four corners of the church, right? To be able to see God in myself and love her regardless, right? To love her fiercely, right? Womanism gives us lenses to be able to see God, to see the divine, to affirm the divine in our bodies, in our image, in our likeness, right? To be able to affirm our human experiences and claim it as divine too, right? And so what I love about your book is you talk about dance and you talk about roundness, you talk about nature, right? And you place the divine in those spaces where oftentimes, particularly in traditional understandings of God, or even in the church, we don't often look for God in those. Matter of fact, I grew up in the spaces that said, when I dance, right, God ain't got nothing to do with that. Right. And so I love your book because your book offers women who are not in the academy a chance to re-image and re-understand, right, and reinterpret their own experiences, but also God. Through lived experience, just through the human experience. So talk a little bit about why it was important for you. I mean, we could be here all day. I told you, I know. Tell us a little bit about why you chose to write a devotional, why it was important that it was womanist. Talk to us a little bit about some of the chapters, and I would also invite you to read one of the entries just so we can get a little taste.
Absolutely. Okay, so the first question is why a devotional? And 2009, seminarian, moving, towards the end of my seminary career, at a point where, there's a point, I don't know if everyone experiences this, but there was a point in seminary for me where I was doing so much work. I'm doing my Bible homework and my church history homework and my systematic theology work and so on and so forth. But I was not tending to my own spirit, right? Just because you read the Bible and do assignments does not mean you're tending to your own spirit. And so I was looking for a devotional book that spoke to me, and I could not find one. Now, this is 2009, right? Because, again, we talk about lenses. The devotional books that are on the market currently are written, the devotional books for women are written from the lens of white women, for white women of a particular theological leaning, right? And that's not to say that I could not find something in them, but I could not find what I needed, what my soul needed in them, right? And so Toni Morrison is quoted as saying, if there's a book that you want to read that's yet to be written, you are the one to write it. And so that's how this came to be. I needed a devotional. I needed something to bolster my own spirit, right? And so that's why a devotional. And then why womanist? So that is womanist is my hermeneutic. That is the framework through which I view the world, through which I, vision God, through which I interpret scripture, through which I watch the debate. That is my lens, right? I also love womanist theology because it makes so much room for creativity, right? So much room for creativity. Like, womanist scholars can, in a moment, spit a verse or start singing a song or reciting a poem in the midst of this very heavy theological work. And so I love the creativity that it would afford. So that is why devotional, that is why a womanist devotional. And tell me your last question again, because my brain just, I lost all of it.
Tell us about some of the chapters of your book.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Okay, so it's a womanist devotional, and it's 40 devotions. It can be read in a number of ways, right? It can be read from day 1 to day 40 consecutively. It can be picked up at any time you may need to read a particular entry. It can be read alone. It can be read with a group. It can be read with another sister. And so the book is 40 devotions, and it's divided into 4 sections based on that third part of Alice Walker's definition that I read before. And so the sections are Love's Spirit, loves dance, loves spirit, loves the folk, loves herself, right? And so love dance is, the entries are music and dance and sisters, food and roundness and style, sass. One of the things I enjoyed writing in this book was reclaiming sass.
Yeah.
As a superpower for Black girls and women.
Say more about that. There are people who are watching, one who might not understand sass, right? Woman is sass, but there are also people who are watching who was taught that sass is dangerous or sass is wrong. It's a
right.
So say a little bit more about sass.
Yes. So in the book, I recount this encounter with Courtney. We were 16 years old. We were out to eat, and she said something, and her father said, "Don't be fresh," right? She was being sassy. I don't remember what she said, but she was being sassy. And her Aunt Elsie said, without hesitation, so quickly, "I'd rather be fresh than stale." When Aunt Elsie said this, she gave us permission to embrace our sass.
Yes.
Right? even at 16 years old, we knew. I mean, I'm 40 something now, and Aunt Elsie's words are still with me. I'd rather be fresh than stale, somebody, right? And so she gave us permission to be sassy, but for Black women, our voices have been silenced, attempted to be silenced for so long. And so people see sass as dangerous, or sass as being out of order, or most often, if you think about it, when a Black girl or a woman is being sassy, she is told, stay in your place.
That's right.
Right. And one of the things that came up there's a devotional group that I'll talk about, but that when we were working through this entry together, one of the things that God showed me is that when Black women embrace our sass and embrace our voice and stand in that, we are standing in our places as God made our places, right? We are standing in the place that God has us. So I'm sassy and you tell me to stay in my place. How about this is my place?
That's right. That's right. That's
right.
right. That's right. And sass is also being able to speak to the powers that be.
Yes.
Right? To be able to speak to systems and to be prophetic in the moment to correct, right? To disturb norms that are destructive to one's humanity. I mean, sass is a whole lot of stuff now.
It's a whole lot of stuff. So
it ain't just about being fresh.
Fresh, exactly. Right. So I lift up in the biblical witness. So each entry, I didn't say this, each entry is grounded in scripture. There's a verse of scripture. And then what I call a love offering. Those are my original words. Is it love? Some questions to guide one's thinking, and then love language, which is a brief one sentence prayer kind of that encapsulates the entry. Also, each entry was guided by some womanist creative thought, which are not included in the book for two reasons. One, getting all those copyrights for 40 quotations, the book wouldn't be out until 2030. That's number one. But number two, as I was working through this, God showed me, and so now here is my own experience with sass in a lot of ways, that my voice was enough.
Yeah. Oh, it gave me chills.
So they're not included for those two reasons, right? But in the entry on sass, I lift up Queen Vashti, who is often vilified, right? And probably has been called sassy from somebody's pulpit. Mm-hmm. But Queen Vashti said no to some foolishness that she ought to have said no to.
That's right.
Right? She was self-possessed.
That's right.
And when we think about it, this world does not like self-possessed Black women. But a sassy Black woman is a self-possessed Black woman. And so yeah. So I love being able to write and like you said, reimagine and reinterpret labels. The next section is love of folk. I have a very expansive view of folk, that folk includes not only my sisters and my brothers and community, meaning, like we have entries such as truth and justice and righteousness, but folk also includes creation and cosmos, right? Yeah. Water and earth. Are included in the folk. We understand ourselves as interconnected. And I think especially when we think about environmental justice and environmental racism, the oppression of the earth, and I'll speak particularly about what's happening in America, the oppression of the earth is likened to the way that Black women have been oppressed. Right? Woo. And so we understand as Black women, when I care for the earth, I care for myself. Yeah. And when I care for myself, I care for the earth, right? That our self-care has communal implications, but also our stewardship of the earth also is about saying to the systems, you do not get to oppress us.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a whole lot of heat there. I'm almost afraid to ask you to read from the book. That right there, we can sit right there. But why don't you offer a reading from the book just to give us a little taste of what's there, your writing and creation, co-laboring with God.
Yes. I'm going to read this entry on justice. I'm going to read the entry on justice. It's one of the heavier entries in the book. And I'm leading a devotional group now. We're about 15 to 17 women every morning at 7 a.m. on Zoom. I read the entry. We have some kind of interactive clip, whether it's music or movie or dance or art, and then we sit with or discuss depending on what the entry is. And so I just read this the other day, and the day of the debates, the vice presidential debates on justice, and then this morning read righteousness, but justice. Psalm 37:30. The mouths of the righteous utter wisdom, and their tongues speak justice. I often call my daughters names to get their attention. Sometimes I whisper, their names lightly lilting off my tongue in love and gratitude. Sometimes my voice is raised, my timbre loud and firm as I call their names in consternation. When I call their names, whatever the tone or mood, I am certain they will answer me. This weighed heavily on me in the wake of the senseless and unjust death of Breonna Taylor. Breonna Taylor, a 26-year-old Black woman, was fatally shot 8 times on March 13, 2020 in her Louisville, Kentucky home by police who entered on a no-knock warrant. I wept as I thought about how Breonna's mother would no longer hear her daughter respond when she calls her name. I lamented that Breonna's name is now called along with Ayanna Stanley Jones, Rakia Boyd, Miriam Carey, Corin Gaines, and Sandra Bland as part of the hashtag Say Her Name campaign, which calls for justice for Black women killed due to police brutality. Black women don't just call the names of sisters who have been killed as a result of police brutality. We call the names of sisters who are victims of sex trafficking, sexual violence, intimate partner abuse, economic disparities, healthcare discrimination, and other structural injustices. We call their names, our names, with God who also knows and calls their names. We call their names because, as the psalmist declared, the mouths of the righteous utter wisdom and their tongues speak justice. After calling their names, we demand justice and work to change oppressive and ungodly systems. Demanding justice for Black women is a spiritual discipline in that it helps us to connect with God and cultivate love, joy, peace, kindness, and faithfulness in community with Black women and our allies. Demanding justice for Black women is the embodiment of loving God and loving our neighbor, our sisters, as ourselves. Demanding justice for Black women ushers in God's glorious kingdom. Call a sister's name, living or dead, as a witness to God's love for her in the face of sin and injustice. After you have said her name, prayerfully engage in tangible acts to demand justice so that her name is not called in vain. And the questions in the Is It Love section are, can love be demonstrated without justice? How can you show your love for God, self, and your sisters through acts of justice? And we pray, strengthen me to speak justice and do justice in the face of existing evil power structures. Amen.
Wow. Love Regardless by the Reverend Donna Owusu-Ansah. Love Regardless. You're writing for Black women to Black women. For our readers for our viewers tonight, will you talk to them in terms of why Black women should invest and buy this book?
Yeah, so I want to say this, not from my perspective as an author. You know, I joked, we had an event at church a couple of weeks ago, and I joked with the ladies, I need y'all to buy these books because my children got to go to college, right? And so, but I don't want to speak from that perspective. And so I'm going to talk from the perspective of those who have read the book and have shared with me the impact that it has had on them. And so I will let them tell you why you should have this book. There have been women who have read this book in one sitting, right? I will say it is an accessible book. It is an accessible book, and who have read this book in one sitting and have cried and have laughed and have seen God's work in their lives in retroactively seen God's work in their lives, right? In ways that they had not seen before. And so I think, so from that perspective, I would say, you know, having Loves Regardless, buying Loves Regardless, reading Loves Regardless would really allow you to do some work, right? Some deeply spiritual work. That's one. I had a woman who is a member of our church. She lives far away, and one of the members, disciples, mailed it to her. And she then requested 3 more books for her friends because, in her words, she has never had a devotional book that centered the life and experiences of Black women. And so for representation matters, right? Representation matters. So one of the reasons I think it's important for Black women to have this book is because you can see yourself, right? Many people have told me, I saw myself when I read your book. I heard myself when I read your book. I was affirmed when I read your book. I was challenged, right? In our devotional group that I'm leading, we're working through the section on Love's the Folk. And that's the heavier section in the book. That's the heavier section in the book, I would say. And I had a sister just text me today and said, you know, working through this and reading this and doing it together has challenged her to ask God, what can I do to tangibly demonstrate my faith and my understanding that justice is not separate from my faith, but is part and parcel of my faith. So I think that's another reason to buy the book. I wrote, and I say this without apology, I wrote this book unapologetically as a Black woman and unapologetically for Black women, right? However, that does not mean that only Black women should read the book, right? And so I have a friend, she's an online friend. We met through a running community, who is a podcaster, a Christian podcaster, and she bought the book, and she actually interviewed me and then has been promoting the book and said for her as a white woman, it does 2 things. One, it has helped ground her spiritual practice, right? So she is also being drawn closer to God, right, through the reading of this book. But 2, and what she needed in this moment, is it opened her eyes to the experience of Black women in America, right? And so for her, it is both spiritual, but it is also helping her in her work of being a co-conspirator in the work of dismantling white supremacy, right? So yeah, those are some of the reasons. Those are some.
I was going to say, you know, reading your book felt like, for me, it was a love letter from God to me as a Black woman. And I felt very much like this God was not the God that Celie talked about in The Color Purple. The God Celie talked about was a white man sitting in the White House who do not hear, right, the stories and cries of Black women. The God that you speak of in your book, I felt very much knew me and saw me and wrote for me and spoke to me. It was like God was a Black woman too.
You see me do my Baptist woman. I told you my rock was going to come out because I feel
It was like God was a Black woman too. And
Mm,
so I'm so in love with this book because I think, the other piece for me why I think this book is so important, particularly as it relates to racial justice work, is we often approach the work of justice with our human hands,
mhm.
human minds, but this is spiritual warfare. And we will not go far absence of the intervention of God.
Right.
We
That's right.
cannot go far. This is spiritual war. We wrestle not with flesh and blood.
Right.
And
And the
so
weapons of our warfare are not carnal,
the
right?
weapons of our warfare
Not
are not
carnal.
carnal. So I
Hmm.
think oftentimes when we talk about the work of justice,
Mhm.
it doesn't always translate, right, as spiritual work.
Right.
Right, as a spiritual discipline,
Yes.
right? And so even the reading you read tonight, right? I felt heard and seen, but there was also a part where I felt called to respond,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I felt responsible,
Yeah.
right, to do something, to stand in that woman sassy space
Yes.
that God has created for me, and to use my sass, right, to speak to systems of oppression, to speak to systems of power that does not honor the human or does not honor the humanity of one's dignity or give dignity to one's humanity. And so what I love about your book is it really does help us to see and hear and feel and even give language,
Mm-hmm.
right, to connect, right, justice work with
Mm-hmm.
spiritual discipline.
Spiritual discipline. Yeah.
Justice work is spiritual discipline.
Yeah. And every entry, let me say this, every entry has some kind of call in it. There's a call to action in every entry. Um, uh, every sermon, I believe, as a preacher, should have a behavioral aim. You don't listen just to listen. As Dr. Henry Mitchell wrote, you want your hearers to do something. I want my readers to do something. And so on the entry on music, I wanted my readers to crank up their favorite song and to listen and let the music pulse through their bodies, right? In the entry on insight, I particularly call Black women to honor the the insight and the wisdom from our bodies, right? The ways that we know when your knee is hurting or your stomach don't feel right, when you're around somebody and you just don't feel right, you got to trust that, right? And so every entry has a call. The entry on joy, right? I was thinking about the debates last night, how Kamala Harris was, on this fine line, right? Because if she was too assertive, she would have been labeled an angry Black woman, which folks I'm sure are, if they haven't done already, are waiting to do, right? And had to be so controlled. And yet, even as Black women, we have to also, one, we should be able to be angry if we need to be angry, because there's some stuff we need to be angry about. But two, also, we need the space and shouldn't have to ask for permission to just experience joy, right? And so in that entry, I talk about smelling joy and tasting joy and feeling joy and experiencing joy, because for Black people, for Black women, joy is an act of resistance. I'm joyful. I'm here. I'm alive. You ain't killed me, and I'm frolicking. I'm not. I'm out here dancing, right? So, so every entry has a call.
That's right. We are people who dance in every situation, right?
Yeah.
Dancing is our war, is one of our spiritual, right, war weapons.
That's right.
Right? One of
Right.
our spiritual war weapons. And so to invite, right, to invite us to dance even in the face, right,
Mhm.
of uprise and racial unrest and, COVID-19 and unemployment, right, to be able to dance in the face. It is one of our spiritual war weapons.
Yes. Yes. And a reminder of our humanity, right?
Right.
Dancing reminds me that I am in this body, in this flesh,
Right.
and that my flesh matters to God,
That's
right?
right.
That
Yes.
God moves through my flesh. So yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, all good things, all good things. Listen, I purchased my book, Love Regardless, on Kindle. I have access to it on my phone, on my iPad, on my laptop. It comes everywhere with me. And I appreciate that it is the kind of devotional book where you don't have to read it one way. There are many different ways you can read it. And so and again, it is our recommended book for the month of October for those of you who are looking for ways to understand racial trauma, for those of you who are looking to understand racial justice work. This very much is the work of racial justice, to affirm or to create space, or to give tools to Black women to affirm their humanity and to love themselves regardless, is the work of dismantling white supremacy among us. And so for those of you who are watching, let me encourage you, if you have not already, to go ahead and purchase that book. And Reverend Donna, I'm going to ask you to share with our audience members, how can they find you? How can they find this book? Where can they purchase this book? Who they should, Christmas holidays are coming up.
Yes.
There's a Black woman in your community that you need to buy
Yes.
this book for, right? Come on and share information about how folks can get this book.
Look, the holidays are coming. That's, we got December. Black History Month is February. Valentine's Day, Women's History Month. Just come on and get the books. So there are a couple of ways you can connect with me on my website at www.Reverend Donna O, all one word spelled out, ReverendDonnaO.com. That's how you can connect with me and keep up with me. You can purchase the book. There are two ways you can purchase it. You can head over to Amazon if you'd like. It is available as a Kindle download. As Reverend Sharizna said, you can also purchase it. Here's a copy of it. You can also purchase it on my website at ReverendDonnaO.com. There's a shop button. If you hit shop, you can purchase it there. The book is $15. If you buy it through my website, I will sign it before I send it so you can have an autographed copy of the book. I also want to highlight that in addition to having Loves Regardless, I also have Love Notes. And Love Notes is a companion journal which allows you to then write your God talk, your joys, your laments, your hopes, and it's broken up by the sections in the book. And so as you read the section, you can be jotting your love letter, right? To yourself, to Black women. And so Love Notes is available. That's $5, also available on Amazon and on my website. And then let me just highlight this. I've said a couple of times, I've mentioned our devotional group that meets at 7 o'clock in the morning via Zoom. It's an amazing group for women. I will have another group starting. It's a 40-day group. We'll have another group starting on January 1st. So please, you can follow me on social media. I am Reverend Donna O on Instagram. Reverend Donna O on Instagram. I don't use Twitter that much because I can't keep up. So don't look for me on Twitter, but you can find me on Facebook at Donna Owusu-Ansah as well. And so if you're interested in the devotional group, check that out. It's been a marvelous time, interactive, beautiful, 20 minutes every morning that has really blessed our souls.
Thank you so much, Reverend Donna, for that. We put the website, you said www.reverendonnao.com.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
it's there in our comment section, ways that you can get in contact with Reverend Donna, ways in which you can get the book, the Love Notes. I'm about to go get Love Notes too. Listen, let me encourage you, for those who are watching, Black women has always been writing. Black women are writing. And as we, again, elevate this work around racial trauma, the healing from racial trauma, specifically as it relates to Black women, I highly recommend this book for those of you who are looking to do this work. I love that you have a devotional group. I mean, and just thinking about ways sisters can come together where you don't have to read this devotion by yourself. You can come and read it with a group of women. You can read it with your family members. This is a book for all. While it is for Black women by a Black woman, but as we said before, Womanist informs us that when you elevate the Black woman, everyone is blessed, everyone benefits. So even a book that is written by Black women for Black women, everyone can benefit from this particular book. So I want to encourage you, if you have not already, to purchase this book as we support this Black woman who's writing. We also support her ministry and her work as we support our own selves, as we learn and lean into this idea, this way of life of being a co-conspirator among us. Thank you, Reverend Donna, for joining us tonight. We're grateful for you. We're grateful for the way you show up in the world. I am so grateful for your yes to God and your commitment to Black women. I tell you all the time, everyone does not have that love or commitment. I'm grateful that you are committed to the love and flourishing of Black women. Thank you for being here tonight, and God bless you.
God bless you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Y'all have a good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.